Welcome back, everybody. It's George here again with Jack Wagon Sports. I'm a day late. I was traveling this past weekend, but nonetheless, it's Tuesday now. The stock market is open, so let's go ahead and dive in to the teams I'm buying in on, selling off, and putting a hold on after week 9 of college football. Let's go ahead and dive right into this week's episode of the college football stock market. As always, we're going to start by looking at who I bought, sold, and held on last week. No holds last week, but I did buy and sell 3 and 3. I bought into Boston College, Northern Illinois, and SMU. Boston College had another win over UConn. NIU, believe they were idle this week. SMU, a huge victory. Teams I sold on, Georgia Tech, and they turned around and they beat UNC at home. I sold on Texas Tech, and I also sold on Marshall. Marshall had a loss. Texas Tech was idle this past weekend. Let's go ahead and get started with this week's picks. I'm going to give you all of my sells first because it's 3 teams I'm very disappointed in. I was very high on a lot of these teams. So let's go ahead and start. We're going to start with Maryland. Maryland sits at 5-3 right now. I didn't kn I didn't have these guys as Big Ten East competitors this year, but I really liked how they played the first couple of weeks. I thought they were gonna be an above average Maryland team. They looked amazing in that first half against Ohio State, and then they just struggled to move the ball. They made a lot of unforced errors in the second half, and Ohio State, sneaks away with the victory. But it's okay. They'll bounce back. I didn't really expect them to beat Ohio State on the road, and obviously that didn't happen. But hey, they have Illinois, then they had Northwestern before they play Penn State at home. Who knows what happens there? Well, then they turn around, they lose to Illinois on a last-second field goal. Then they go on the road and get their butts whooped by Northwestern 33-27. And then again, looking at this upcoming schedule, where I thought I saw, maybe a 9-win team at worst. I I don't know if I see a 7-win team. I think it's gonna be a fight to get to 6 wins even. So they host Penn State this week, who's had their own struggles the past few weeks. Then they're at Nebraska, who's really turned it on the last few weeks. I'm very impressed with how they played. I think they are in line for a bowl game. Then they have number 2 Michigan coming to town. I had said all season, Michigan and Ohio State always seem to draw Maryland that week before the game. Last year was Ohio State. Maryland almost pulls off the upset. This year is going to be Michigan. I really predicted that. Who knows? Maybe that happens this year. At this rate, I don't see that happening. But that it's still, the week before. Teams can definitely get their focus shifted ahead and let even bad teams hang around. And Maryland, I don't want to say they're a bad team. They've looked inconsistent lately. Obviously, the Kevin Sumlin thing going on is a huge distraction. That's not helping anything. I'm just very disappointed with how Maryland has looked the past couple weeks. And then they finished the season at Rutgers, who's a pretty good Big Ten East team. I'm really impressed with how Rutgers has played. They've already clinched a bowl spot. So Maryland has a very difficult road ahead to even get one, let alone 2 wins. But I do not see them getting that 9-win mark like I had previously stated before the Ohio State game. Let's go ahead. Let's move on to another team I'm selling. We go from a former ACC team to an ACC team. I mentioned how I sold on Georgia Tech last week. Well, I'm going to sell who they just beat, and that's on UNC. UNC has lost their last 2 games to opponents they were over, 10-point favorites. Teams they definitely should have beaten handedly, and they were unable to do so. They go from being the number 10 team in the country to unranked in 2 weeks. There's also some rumors swirling. I don't know how true this is. I've looked for more reports that Drake May is considering sitting for the rest of the season. I don't see that happening, but we shall wait and see. Like I said, all unconfirmed reports. Um, I'm mainly selling on UNC right now. Obviously, they've already clinched a bowl game. But in terms of competing for the ACC title, I think they're definitely out of it at this point. I think Virginia Tech has a better chance of making the ACC championship game than UNC, and especially with this upcoming schedule. I think this is a team that's maybe going to start to quit on itself a little bit. I mean, you have 2 back-to-back losses like this. It's very disheartening, and it's tough to keep yourself motivated for the rest of the season when it seems like your goals have slipped farther and farther out of reach. They host Campbell and FCS school this weekend. Then they have the Duke the weekend after that. Duke is going to be, I think, on the come up off of their losses. By that point, I think they'll be healthy. I think they'll be ready to compete by that game. And then they have to go to Clemson and to NC State. NC State has had their number the past couple of years. Even the best UNC teams seem to find ways to lose to NC State. This could absolutely be another example of that. And so I'm really concerned with how UNC is going to finish the rest of their season. A team where we really thought that, hey, they have a shot at winning the ACC title is now suddenly looking at, just another average season for a basketball school. Staying in the ACC, the third and final team I'm gonna sell in this week is Syracuse. Um, I was very high on this team as well at the start of the season. They started off 4-0. They looked very good. They had a lowly Clemson team come to town. It's a great chance for them to avenge what happened last year. They started off 6-0, and then they turned around. They really struggled, and it all started with blowing that second half lead against Clemson. This game, they were never really in it, and Clemson dominated them 31-14. Hey, it's all right. You have more chances upcoming to really prove yourself. They go to UNC, they get demolished 40-7. Then they go to Florida State 41-3. And then this past weekend, Thursday night, they were at Virginia Tech, and Virginia Tech manhandled Syracuse up and down the field for 4 quarters and a 38-10 win. And now you're sitting here, you're looking at Syracuse. This is a carbon copy of what happened last season. Very strong start. The wheels completely fall off. And now I really feel like they're going to struggle to make a bowl game here with their upcoming schedule. They have Boston College and Pitt at home. I think Pitt is the most winnable game out of their upcoming stretch. But Boston College is on a heater here lately. They looked very good the past couple of weeks. Um, and, this is a team determined they need one more win to make bowl eligibility. I talked about this last week. They're a team that a lot of people had written off. And then all of a sudden you look up and they need one more win to get there. I think they're going to be very motivated for this game at Syracuse. And Syracuse is still kind of licking their wounds. And so I'm concerned in that aspect. Um, Pitt just got their butts beat by Notre Dame. It wasn't close, 58-7. They were very high coming off that Louisville win. They're gonna play Florida State this weekend. I don't see them upsetting Florida State. And so I think Syracuse should handle Pitt, but we'll wait and see. Then they're at Georgia Tech, who is one of the weirdest teams in college football. They lose to teams that they should beat by 20, and then they beat teams by 10 that they should lose to by 30. And so Georgia Tech is a very interesting team, and that game being on the road is going to be difficult for Syracuse as well. And then they end against Wake Forest, who is another weird kind of team to watch. They're fighting to try and make a bowl game at this point. It doesn't look great for them. A few weeks ago, I would have marked this down as a definite win for Syracuse, and now I really feel like this is going to be a toss-up. I really feel like Dino Babers, with the way the last 2 seasons have gone, needs to be on the hot seat. I'm not saying you necessarily need to fire him, but you need to put a little pressure on him. That it's unacceptable that the collapses that Syracuse has had the last 2 seasons. Um, if you want to build your football program up to be contenders, and not just the ACC but nationally, start pulling in, big time recruits, all this other stuff. You need to get serious about not being okay with losing like this. And so again, I'm not saying fire Dino Babers, but I'm saying I think his seat it definitely needs to start to get a little warm here in the upcoming weeks. But let's stop talking about teams. I'm selling on all the bad. Let's go ahead and flip over to an ACC team that I'm going to buy in on, and that is Virginia Tech. I briefly mentioned them. Um, they started 1-3, and now they're sitting here at 4-4. I think again a team that we were writing off a few weeks ago to completely miss out on a bowl game this season is suddenly looking at an upcoming schedule where I can see them capturing a bowl game. Looking at their past couple games, they beat Pitt very handily at home. Then they go on the road to Florida State. The score says 39-17. It wasn't that far apart. Virginia Tech looked really good in the first half. They started super strong in the second half. They take the opening kickoff back. And then, they immediately let Florida State score on their first offensive play. And you kind of see the air get let out Virginia Tech, and they were never able to really get back close. But I'm still very impressed with how Virginia Tech played in that game. And then they come back home, they have to play Wake Forest. That could have easily been another letdown after everything that just happened at Florida State. And they played extremely well in that game. They win 30-13. And then this past week, like I just talked about, they just dominate Syracuse at home on Thursday night. A huge victory for the Hokies. And now again, you're looking at this upcoming schedule. Difficult test this weekend at Louisville, and then you have to go to Boston College and Chestnut Hill. That's going to be a difficult test as well. And then NC State. with that game being at home, I like Virginia Tech in that game. And then last but not least, at Virginia. Virginia is a very tough team to get by. They have not given anybody an easy win this season. And this game being on the road, this is a rivalry game. This Virginia Tech, to be in the best case scenario, needs to find a way to win 2 out of their next 3 games, because I really feel like anything can happen in that Virginia game, and like I had previously, briefly alluded to, Virginia Tech is not eliminated from the ACC contention. I feel like a lot of uncertainty and craziness that's coming our way out of the ACC, and who knows, maybe we see Virginia Tech Florida State rematch in Charlotte in a month. Um, I don't personally see that happening, but and, crazier things have happened in college football. I think we're in for an exciting ride through the rest of the ACC, but I really like Virginia Tech to find a way to win 2 of these next 4 games, and get back to a bowl game. I think that'd be huge for the program, huge for Brent Pry. Again, a lot of fans have been upset with him, and I think one thing Virginia Tech fans need to understand is, ever since Frank Beamer left, that talent pool has just been drained. It's been very difficult to get recruits there. Brett Pry is basically building up this program, from zero. It almost seems like. I'm really impressed with what he's done, even just this season. The fight to get to 4 wins at this point, and I really like Virginia Tech to get to a bowl game, and I'm hoping they can get there. But just relax on Brent Pry a little bit. Um, Next team I'm gonna put a hold on is Washington. They looked very good coming off that win against Oregon, and Oregon has, looked better and better since that loss. But you look at, Washington, obviously, they're still undefeated, and that's a huge, asterisk by putting a hold on them, but I understand there's, some injuries and stuff going on, but the last 2 weeks, especially that Arizona State game, they should have lost that game. The referees handed that game to Washington. You can argue with me all you want, but that was even with the score, Washington didn't win that game. They came out of that game losers. And then this past week, they go to Stanford, and again, they looked ugly. They failed to put away Stanford repeatedly. If it's not for a wide open tight end dropping a fourth down conversion, who knows? Maybe we're talking about Washington losing that game as well. Um, I think the last 2 weeks have started to kind of pull Penix back from being the Heisman front runner. JJ McCarthy has leaped ahead in the betting odds. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. deserves to have his name up there. I think Bo Nix should be higher in that conversation. I say he needs to be the favorite. I'm just saying he needs to be higher in the conversation. And Troy Franklin, yeah, I mean, we're talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. I really feel like Troy Franklin doesn't get any attention, any eyes, any love, and I feel like he absolutely deserves that. But back to Washington, I'm just putting a hold on them right now, mainly because of how they looked the last 2 weeks, and then you look at this upcoming schedule, we talk about this every year with the Pac-12, it turns into a cannibal. It's a meat grinder through the end of the season. Oregon obviously just came off a huge test against Washington. They're not out of the woods. They still have to play USC at home, still have to play Oregon State, Arizona State on the road, which always seems the Arizona schools always seem to bite Oregon in the ass. But looking at Washington here at USC this upcoming week, then home against Utah. Obviously, Utah doesn't look too great coming off the Oregon loss, but it's always going to be a difficult test against Utah. And then they're at Oregon State, who again coming off a loss, they're going to be a very determined team to keep their chances alive of making the Pac-12 title game. And then the last game of the year is the Apple Cup. Washington State has seemingly fallen off a cliff. They just lost again this past weekend to Arizona State. I really, and I say this probably way too much, but rivalry games are some of the most unpredictable games to try and forecast. Especially looking ahead, it doesn't matter how good or bad teams are. Everybody gets up for that game. Everybody wants to play their best and beat their in-state rival, especially. And so that's not going to be an easy game for Washington. But that the upcoming schedule, the way they look the last 2 weeks, I'm going to put a hold on Washington. Um, and kind of pull back on the rhetoric of I think these guys are national championship contenders and favorites. They need to clean up and look much better than what they had the last 2 weeks. Let's go ahead and move on to the next team I'm putting a hold on, and that's Kansas State. Kansas State has looked very, very impressive ever since that loss to Oklahoma State. They go on the road, they beat Texas Tech by more than 2 scores. Then they thumped TCU and Houston the last 2 weeks, giving up 3 points allowed, scoring 82 points. just really impressive stuff out of Kansas State. They have put their names back into conversation of being Big 12 title contenders, trying to sneak their way into Dallas. The reason I'm putting a hold on them is for that conversation exactly. I'm just really concerned with this upcoming schedule for them. Obviously, the biggest test is this weekend at Texas. Texas will not have Quinn Ewers, but still, Texas looked very good on both sides of the ball against BYU. And even on the backside of that, they have Baylor and then at Kansas, who just pulled off a huge upset. They're flying high right now. That game's in Lawrence, so that's going to be I feel like a difficult environment for the rivalry game. And then they have Iowa State, the last game of the year. Iowa State has been biting teams in the butt the entire season. They have kept their season alive somehow. I talked about them a few weeks ago when it seemed like they were dead in the water, and all of a sudden here they are. They're not out of contention for the Big 12 either. They have to host Kansas this week. Kansas could easily get caught in a trap, coming off that high. Now you have to go on the road. You have to play at Iowa State. They can easily get caught in that game. And again, we can be looking at the end of the season where Iowa State is, still in the conversation, still has a say in what happens, and as far as the Big 12 championship game goes. So I'm really interested to see how the rest of the season plays out. I'm very impressed with Kansas State to this point, but just looking at this upcoming schedule, that's why I'm putting a hold on Kansas State for now. All right, next up, we're going to move over to the teams that I'm going to be buying in on to wrap up this week's episode. First up is Boise State. They sit at 4-4 right now. They've won 2 out of their last 4 to get to that point. Coming off of that Memphis loss, I was really, really curious as to see how Boise State would go from here. And then we talked about that Colorado State game. That is a deflating loss. They were up, you know, multiple scores late with 4 minutes left. And then all of a sudden, the blink of an eye, they lose that game 31-30 on the road. That can be a loss that deflates the rest of your season. I mean, we've seen it with Colorado. They blew that 29-0 lead to Stanford, and they really struggled since then. And now they go on the road this past weekend. They play Wyoming, and excuse me, they played Wyoming at home, and they just opened up a can of whoop ass on them. Wyoming is one of the best teams in the Mountain West. I took them to win this game. I thought Boise State was favored coming in. I didn't understand it. And then all of a sudden, that you look up and it's 32-7, and Boise State is back to looking like the Mountain West contender we thought they were coming into the season. Um, and I really like their upcoming schedule too. They're at Fresno State this weekend, but on the backside of that, um, they have New Mexico State at home. They're at Utah State, and then they have Air Force at home. As you can see here from their past record, they struggle on the road. I think they've only lost one home game this season, and that was against UCF, and that was a very close game. Um, all their other losses have come on the road, though. Memphis, Colorado State, and then Washington as well. So they play very well at home. That heads up to Air Force. Boise State could be the team that keeps Air Force out of a New Year's Six bowl. And if they can play the way they just played this past weekend against again what I said is one of the better teams in the Mountain West, I'm very curious as to see where Boise State can go for the rest of the season. But like I said, difficult schedule up ahead, but I have much higher expectations of Boise State as compared to just 2 weeks ago, especially with that Colorado State loss. And I definitely see at least a bowl game in their future. I know that was probably a little uncertain, but I like where this team is heading, and I have some belief in Boise State now. Staying in the group of 5, I am going to buy into Troy. Their record is 6-2 right now. They had a very difficult start to the season. They were 1-2. Now they've rattled off 5 straight wins. They've looked very impressive in conference so far. They beat Georgia State on the road, Arkansas State at home, and then this past weekend they beat Texas State on the road as well. I've been very high on Texas State this season, and Troy goes in there and just handles them for 4 quarters, 31-13 victory. I think this is the Sun Belt favorite. James Madison obviously can't win the conference this year. If they could, that would be my favorite because they've already beat Troy head to head. And now you're looking here, their upcoming schedule, South Alabama. South Alabama's looking very good until this past week where Louisiana just handled them. Then they're at Louisiana Monroe. They have Louisiana at home and then at Southern Miss. I think um, South Alabama and Louisiana are going to be the toughest games. Monroe and Southern Miss are kind of bottom tier of the Sun Belt. But I really like Troy to go back to back and repeat as Sun Belt champions. They've really turned around since the early weeks of the season. After the first 3 weeks, I really thought, maybe Troy's out of it. This isn't the same Troy team that we saw last year. They're really struggling so far this season. Not that they would miss out on a bowl game, but maybe they're not ready to repeat as Sun Belt champions. Maybe it's South Alabama's turn, or another team would come up and take it. Texas State looked very good at the beginning of the year, but they really turned that season around. I really like how they played the past couple of weeks, and they look very good. And last team we're going to talk about is I'm going to buy into Georgia here. Um, I've had my reservations about this team all season. It seems like this is what it is every year now. Is we have our doubts about Georgia. They don't look too good. I've been very critical of how they played in some of their games. They've not and man, this isn't Georgia's fault, but this is more of a Vegas problem. But they really struggled to cover spreads at the beginning of the year. Playing FCS or MAC schools or you know really bad teams. Vanderbilt was another one. They didn't cover the spread. And then all of a sudden, Brock Bowers goes down. And I probably listened way too much to outside media about how much Brock Bowers mattered to this Georgia offense and how bad they're gonna struggle to move the ball. And then they go and they play Florida, and they just whooped Florida's ass for 4 quarters. A lot of people are picking Florida to possibly upset Georgia and all this other stuff. And Georgia goes out there and they just silenced everybody. They showed why they are still the favorites to win the SEC. Now they do have a difficult stretch here upcoming. They play 3 ranked teams. Out of the 3 of them, and this is slightly probably a hot take, I think Missouri is going to give them the toughest fight. Missouri is a very determined team. Throw out what happened last year. I understand that was a one possession game. It was very close. Missouri looked like they were going to upset Georgia. Um, I'm not even looking at that. I'm looking at more so that, Missouri has had a lot of talk around them all season, and anytime they face a tough opponent, it's okay, well, this is where Missouri's gonna get tripped up. They looked very impressive against LSU for the first 3 quarters, I would say, and then they really struggled towards the end of that game and end up losing. Looking at the other teams, Tennessee sucks. They should have lost this past week. The refs handed them that game. Alabama exposed them for the frauds that they are. Um, Tennessee still being ranked is kind of hysterical to me at this point. And then you look at Ole Miss again. They they have the ability to have one of the most explosive offenses in the country, but they also have a terrible defense, and they also have times where that offense just goes absolutely ice cold. Look at the Alabama game. And so that's why I feel like Missouri is gonna be the toughest game out of the upcoming. I might be completely wrong. Who knows? Maybe Ole Miss does, hang around and keep that game close, but I really feel like Missouri is the toughest upcoming game for Georgia here outside of, whoever they end up playing in the SEC title game. We have a huge game in the SEC West to kind of shed some more light on the race for the SEC West. But I think Georgia is obviously still the favorite in the East. I think overall they're the favorite across the board. And I'm going to start buying into Georgia here. I'm not trying to jinx them, but who knows where we go for the rest of the season. So that'll do it for this week's edition of the College Football Stock Market. Make sure you guys drop a comment down below. Tell me what teams I should be looking into buying and selling or putting a hold on. As always, we thank you guys for your support. Drop a like and a subscribe for more college football content. Head over to our social medias on TikTok. We make daily college football content, and we really appreciate your support over there. We will see you guys in the next video.